No one expected the congressional oversight hearing on ethics reform to ignite fireworks. It was meant to be procedural, just another televised exchange of party-line talking points. But when Pam Bondi took her seat before the panel, something shifted. There was a buzz in the room. A few Democrats chuckled quietly, underestimating her as they always had. Nancy Pelosi, seated at the head of the Democratic bloc, leaned into her mic with her trademark condescension. "Ms. Bondi," she began, "before you lecture us on accountability, perhaps you should explain your recent involvement with that super PAC under investigation." Bondi didn't flinch. She leaned forward slowly, adjusted the microphone, and smiled, not politely, but like someone who had brought receipts. "Madam Speaker," Bondi said calmly, "I suggest you check page 47 of the federal audit I submitted this morning." Confused murmurs rose as staffers scrambled to pull up the document. "I've done nothing wrong," she continued. "But while we're on the topic of political finances, would you like me to read aloud the list of foreign contributors to your last 3 campaign cycles?" The room froze. Cameras zoomed in. Pelosi blinked. Then Bondi dropped a thick file on the desk in front of her. "Because I have it right here." The sound of the thick file hitting the polished oak table echoed louder than expected, almost like a gavel. The murmuring stopped. Even the Democratic aides, usually unfazed, leaned in nervously. Nancy Pelosi's face tightened. "This isn't your hearing, Ms. Bondi," she said sharply. "We're not here to entertain conspiracy theories." Bondi didn't blink. "Then let's stick to facts." She opened the folder and pulled out a color-coded chart. "This," she said, holding it up for the cameras, "is a detailed timeline of campaign donations made to your affiliated committees by shell corporations registered overseas. Many of them trace back to the same P.O. boxes in the Cayman Islands. The same boxes, Madam Speaker, that appear in at least 2 federal investigations." Gasps. Audible gasps. A few journalists in the gallery scrambled to take photos of the documents. A Republican lawmaker 2 rows back let out a soft whistle. Pelosi, clearly rattled, glanced at her chief counsel seated behind her. "That information is unverified and out of context," she muttered. Pam Bondi didn't let up. "Then I invite this committee to verify it. Right here. Right now. I've already submitted the original files to the Office of Congressional Ethics." The chair of the hearing, who until now had tried to maintain a neutral stance, cleared his throat. "If what Ms. Bondi is presenting is accurate, we may need to recess for review." Pelosi looked stunned. Bondi leaned back in her seat, hands folded. "I came here prepared, Madam Speaker." "Did you?" The room was now eerily quiet. The smug grins that had adorned several Democratic faces were gone, replaced by tightly clenched jaws and darting eyes. Staffers behind Pelosi were furiously whispering, some typing frantically on phones and tablets. Pam Bondi waited, poised and patient, like a prosecutor who knew the jury had already shifted in her favor. Pelosi broke the silence. "This is clearly a coordinated smear," Bondi cut in, firm but calm. "Respectfully, Speaker Pelosi, it's a coordinated investigation. And it's been in motion for 6 months. The Office of Congressional Ethics issued sealed subpoenas last quarter. You weren't notified, yet." Gasps swept through the room again. A younger Democrat, Representative Sloan from Oregon, leaned forward. "Are you implying the Speaker of the House is under active investigation?" "I'm not implying anything," Bondi said. "I'm stating that her name appears in at least 3 sealed dockets relating to questionable campaign financial activity. This isn't partisan. It's procedural. And it's overdue." The chair of the hearing, a centrist independent from Pennsylvania, turned to Bondi. "Are you prepared to submit sworn testimony?" Pam nodded once. "Absolutely. Today, if necessary." Pelosi's voice cracked slightly. "You're trying to destroy my reputation with unconfirmed leaks and innuendo." "No, Madam Speaker," Bondi replied sharply, rising to her feet. You destroyed your reputation the moment you thought no one was watching. Dead silence. Pelosi sat frozen. Even the opposing party had nothing to say. Pam Bondi had just flipped the hearing on its head. C-SPAN's live feed was now trending across every major social platform. News anchors were interrupting regular programming with "breaking update" banners. What started as a routine ethics hearing had just turned into political detonation. Pam Bondi remained standing, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, deliberately, she slid a sealed envelope across the table toward the committee chair. "This contains a notarized affidavit from a former finance director of Speaker Pelosi's leadership PAC," she said. "Inside, you'll find dates, amounts, and internal emails, some of which reference direct knowledge of illicit bundling tactics. I suggest you treat it with urgency." The chair opened it hesitantly, reading a few lines before visibly paling. Meanwhile, Pelosi fumbled with her microphone. "This is political theater. Nothing more. She's weaponizing innuendo to discredit a lifetime of public service." Bondi turned slowly toward her. "No, Speaker Pelosi. I'm revealing the reality behind the performance. You've built your legacy on power, not transparency. And now the curtain's being pulled back." A few Democratic members shifted uncomfortably. Representative DeLeon, a longtime Pelosi ally, looked visibly shaken. One of his aides leaned in and whispered something. He immediately stood up and quietly left the room, without a word. Reporters caught it on camera. The drip was becoming a flood. The committee chair cleared his throat again. "Given the nature of this new information, I am calling for an immediate closed-door session. This hearing is now in recess." The gavel fell. Chaos erupted. And Pam Bondi, unshaken, gathered her notes and walked out as the media stampeded toward the doors. The moment Bondi stepped into the hallway, reporters swarmed like hornets. Flashbulbs popped, microphones stretched toward her, voices overlapped in a storm of questions. "Ms. Bondi, is Speaker Pelosi really under investigation? Can you confirm the authenticity of the affidavit? Do you expect indictments?" Bondi raised one hand and calmly addressed the crowd. "I can't comment further on sealed investigations. But I will say this, no one, regardless of title or tenure, is above the law. The American people deserve honesty. And I won't stop until they get it." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Others gasped. The video clip would rack up millions of views before the sun set. Inside the chamber, panic had begun to take hold. Pelosi's legal team huddled in a private conference room just off the hearing hall. Her longtime communications director was on the phone with crisis PR firms. One Democratic strategist whispered, "If that affidavit holds up, we're talking resignation-level fallout." Meanwhile, a group of swing district Democrats had already begun privately texting one another. Some of them had been barely holding on in the last election. Now, they were considering distancing themselves, immediately. In a secure back office, Pelosi sat stiffly at the end of a long table, her jaw clenched as she listened to her general counsel read through the affidavit Bondi had submitted. The contents were worse than expected. A damning trail of correspondences, financial inconsistencies, and a particularly damaging memo labeled "urgent," offshore coordination, dated just before the midterms. Pam Bondi hadn't just delivered a blow. She'd shattered the shield. By late afternoon, the Capitol was no longer functioning like the nation's legislative engine, it was in damage control. Offices of senior Democrats were pulling staff into emergency meetings. Phones were ringing non-stop. News anchors were live outside the building. Every corridor buzzed with one question: what else does Bondi have? Over in the Republican wing, aides were scrambling too, not out of fear, but opportunity. Bondi's revelation was already being framed as the beginning of a political reckoning. Some GOP leaders were drafting a formal request for a full House Ethics Committee investigation before the day ended. Inside Pelosi's office, things had turned icy. A senior DNC liaison arrived to speak with her privately. The door was shut for nearly 20 minutes. When it opened, the staff noticed something chilling. Pelosi looked pale, distant, and for the first time, unsure. "We need to get ahead of this," the liaison said. "Control the narrative. Frame it as an attack. A smear from Trump's allies." Pelosi nodded slowly. "And if the affidavit is confirmed?" The liaison hesitated, then replied grimly, "Then it's survival mode." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi wasn't done. In a press conference later that evening, she stood before a podium surrounded by folders, evidence tags, and printed emails. Her tone remained calm, deliberate. "I warned this Congress months ago that if we didn't clean up our own house, someone else would. This isn't a partisan takedown. It's about restoring integrity." Then she dropped one final bombshell: "I've submitted everything to the DOJ's Public Integrity Section. They've already assigned a special counsel." The room exploded. And for the first time in her political career, Nancy Pelosi had no response. As Bondi's press conference played on every screen in the Capitol, Democratic leadership scrambled behind closed doors. The revelation that the Department of Justice had already received the evidence, and assigned a special counsel, was like a tectonic crack through the party's foundation. Pelosi's inner circle tried to spin it. Late-night statements were drafted, blaming politically motivated leaks and election interference, but even progressive anchors were hesitating to carry the narrative. Outside the Capitol, the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Hashtags like #PelosiFiles and #BondiBombshell dominated social media. Independents were especially vocal, demanding transparency, investigations, and accountability. By morning, 5 moderate Democrats had publicly called for Pelosi to temporarily step down from leadership until the facts are clarified. It was a dagger. In response, Bondi released a second batch of documents. This time, the emails weren't from former staff, they were from current congressional aides. One directly referenced manipulating campaign donation caps using donor aliases. Another contained a memo allegedly sent to Pelosi, detailing external coordination with advocacy groups operating in legal gray areas. The implication was clear: not only was there knowledge of wrongdoing, but strategic planning behind it. That same day, House Majority Whip Carolyn Trent called an emergency caucus meeting. Tensions were explosive. "Pam Bondi is playing chess," Trent said bluntly. "And we are reacting like amateurs. If we don't act, the entire House leadership could go down with her." A hush fell over the room. No one dared say it aloud yet, but everyone was thinking the same thing: Pelosi's days at the top might be numbered. The Democratic caucus meeting stretched well past midnight. Tensions ran high, with voices raised and loyalties tested. Some of Pelosi's most loyal allies, once unwavering, were now privately urging her to consider a graceful transition. She sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, stone-faced. But she wasn't deaf to the shift. Even allies like Representative Trent and Senator Mallory, longtime power brokers, were dancing around the word resignation. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi, completely removed from the internal chaos, was already steps ahead. The following morning, she appeared on a major morning show holding a flash drive. The host, clearly taken aback, asked if she planned to release more evidence. Bondi's reply was cold and decisive: "I'm not in the business of threats. I'm in the business of truth. And if Congress fails to act, I will." It was a direct challenge to the establishment. A dare. Back on the Hill, fallout continued to spread. Polling data leaked showing Pelosi's favorability had dropped 17 points in 48 hours. Donors were pulling out. Senate Democrats were now issuing carefully worded statements expressing concern over the situation. Then, quietly but definitively, a House Democrat from Michigan introduced a resolution calling for a formal ethics inquiry into Pelosi's conduct. It was the first time in 2 decades that such a move had been made against a sitting speaker by her own party. And in one of the most dramatic turns, a former Obama-era chief of staff tweeted, "Bondi just cracked the old guard wide open." The silence from leadership speaks louder than anything she said. By sunset, staffers were whispering that Pelosi had locked herself in her private office with her closest legal team. She hadn't spoken publicly in over 24 hours. Day 3 felt like a political siege. The Capitol press corps hadn't slept. Congressional aides tiptoed through hallways, avoiding eye contact with reporters. Bondi's documents had now been verified by independent watchdogs. Major outlets, once hesitant, were confirming the worst. Multiple emails, financial records, and whistleblower statements aligned too precisely to be dismissed. Inside Pelosi's private office, tension hung like fog. Her attorneys spoke in low, clipped tones. Several longtime staffers had gone silent, some even cleared their desks. Trust had fractured. Outside, the narrative had turned fully against her. Protesters gathered with signs reading, "No more double standards," and "Bondi brought the receipts." At a private meeting that afternoon, Democratic leadership confronted the moment head-on. Carolyn Trent didn't sugarcoat it: "If you don't step aside, you'll drag the entire caucus into this. And we won't survive the midterms." Pelosi didn't respond immediately. For a moment, the old fire in her eyes returned. "This is my legacy," she said. "I built this." "No," Trent replied bluntly. "You had your legacy. Now it's unraveling by the hour." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi wasn't slowing down. She met with House Oversight Republicans, pushing for expedited hearings and full release of all subpoenaed records. Then, at a midday press conference, she delivered her sharpest line yet: "This isn't about Nancy Pelosi the politician. It's about the culture of immunity that's infected Washington for too long. If one of the most powerful figures in Congress can be held accountable, anyone can." Reporters asked if she had more evidence. Her smile was slight. "Plenty." That evening, Speaker Pelosi's office released a short statement: "Speaker Pelosi will be addressing the nation live at 10 p.m. The entire country waited. At exactly 10 p.m., every major network cut to the Capitol. The podium was set. Cameras focused. Microphones buzzed. America held its breath. Then she appeared. Nancy Pelosi stepped forward, not in her signature designer suit, but in a plain navy outfit, no jewelry, no embellishment. Her voice, when it came, was steady but hollow. "For decades, I've served this country with dedication. I've weathered political storms, led through crises, and stood my ground when others faltered." She paused, visibly grappling with the weight of the moment. "But I cannot allow personal accusations, true or false, to eclipse the integrity of this House." Gasps rang out in newsrooms across the country. Effective immediately, she continued, "I will be stepping down as Speaker of the House. I will cooperate fully with all inquiries. I do this not out of guilt, but out of duty." Then, almost as an afterthought, "The truth always finds its way forward." She turned and walked off the stage without taking questions. Less than 10 minutes later, Pam Bondi responded live from outside the DOJ building. "This isn't a celebration," she said. "It's a correction. The system worked, but only because someone dared to challenge it." By morning, the headlines were unanimous: "Pelosi resigns in shock reversal," "Bondi's bombshell ends and ERA, truth wins," "Bondi forces political reckoning on Capitol Hill, accountability returns to Washington." And though Pelosi's portrait would still hang in the halls of Congress, history would never forget who brought the walls crashing down: Pam Bondi, calm, relentless, and unshakable.